Good morning, dear friends. After a few day break, it is now Tuesday, November 2nd, the 26th of Cheshvan, right? We're approaching, I think it's the 26th, the 27th. You see what happens? I leave my sense of time is a little bit sumished. Anyways, we're here learning Gemara, the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, Maseches Shabbos, chapter
27.
9.
27.
Sorry? 27. Okay,
Zayin.
see, I told you. Chav Zayin. Okay, so we're studying the entire Talmud, Maseches Shabbos, Perek Chi, chapter 9, Pei Dalet Amud Beis. Now I have a little confession to make, which is that when I learned Maseches Shabbos in Yeshiva, I do not have a memory of Perek Rabbi Akiva, at least not of this coming Mishnah. I don't know why. Maybe we skipped it. You'll see soon. It's another different style. And for me, it was a little bit of a new, it's going to be a little bit of a new learning experience. The interesting thing about this next Mishnah is that there's one text, but a multitude of interpretations and ways of deciphering this passage of the Talmud. I think we're going to stick with Rashi to the best of our ability, but just know that there are a multitude of interpretations, and it actually doesn't have to be as complicated as it sounds, considering that there's so many interpretations. But I just want you to know that there's a lot going on over here, and it's about field layouts and farming. Sort of, Alan, I hope you're going to stay alert.
We'll help you out, Rabbi. Don't worry.
Present, you'll help me out.
We'll help
And
you out.
it's a different. The other interesting thing, or one of the, is that as we know, there are Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. There are 6 orders of the Talmud. The first order of the Talmud is called Zeroyim, and it's about agriculture. So it starts off with brachas, which is the blessings, which are mostly out of things you eat. But then it has all the other things, kilayim and peya, and what else? All the different Mishnahs that are about Meiser Rishon, Meiser and Meisers, and all the other items that that pertain to agriculture. Because as we know, Jewish people in Israel were primarily, though not exclusively, farmers and into agriculture. And the Torah has many halachas about how to be an ethical farmer, the contributions that we give to society, to the Kohanim, to the Leviim, to the Aniyim. There are portions that are brought up to the land of Israel. That are brought up to Yerushalayim. That's Meister Sheni. And there is Shemitah, Shavias. So there's times that we don't work the land at all. This year is a Shemitah year. So in Israel, those who follow, suffice it to say, the laws of Shemitah introduce many halachic complexities to those in the agricultural field and those purchasing produce. So there's a lot going on. It's very real. It's very relevant. In reality, however, we don't have any Gemara explicitly on other Mesechtas of Zerayim with the exclusion of brachas. And so it's possible for a yeshiva student to get a little less. Of course, it comes up throughout the Shas, but it isn't in an organized area. So it's plausible for a yeshiva student to avoid in-depth study on these matters. And so, the way you know that this is a special event is I'll share with you the Surah Sadaf. I'll share with you the way the Gemara looks, and you'll see Rashi. And I showed this to you last time when we learned almost a week ago that we have pictures, not a lot of pictures, but some pictures and diagrams to help us visualize what this field looks like. And so today, that we're not entirely engaged in the art or the field of agriculture. So some of it is a little bit, new to us. So that's what we're going to be dealing with. Dr. Hammer, bevakasha.
Thank you for the confession. Where I grew up, they would usually say, put $5 in the box and say 3 Hail Marys. So I didn't know confession was a regular part of our religion during the year, but I'm glad to learn more. Thank you.
So if anyone here gives dispensation, I'll take it.
Right.
No, so it means that we're going to have to learn for something that's relatively new, and so all the fun that entails. So let's share the screen. Let's get started. We're using, as always, the translation provided by through the website safaria.org. and the translation is from the Rabbi Steinsaltz, the Steinsaltz Gemara. And actually, as I mentioned in the pre-discussion, they had a table so I was for those that are listening, we'll just say I was in New York for the conference of Chabad Shluchim. Of course, it was somewhat muted this year as COVID still is very much a reality and influences a lot of how we live our life. But we were there and it was nice to see some friends that I haven't seen for a few years. And it's nice to see that Klal Yisrael is alive and kicking and Yiddishkeit is growing and there's a lot of vibrancy and good news from around the globe about Jews that are finding their Yiddishkeit and growing in their Yiddishkeit. And so that's good news. So I actually bumped into the table. The Koren publishers had a table somewhere in Brooklyn and we had a nice schmooze and I have the email address. And I told them, listen, I want to get some, there's a lot of beautiful Koren Svarim, including the Talmud that they have. So, but anyway, so they gave the guy, I guess he thought I would be a good customer. So he gave me a booklet of this chapter from the Steinsaltz Gemara. And so there's some lovely pictures. And so just sharing, there's nice stuff. If anyone's interested in sponsoring some Koren Svarim, if that's something that's interesting to you, there's no pressure. There's not a solicitation, but you're more than welcome to reach out. And there's some beautiful. There's a new Rabbi Steinsaltz Chumash and Tanakh, and there's a new Svarim still coming out. I think from Rabbi Sachs, Olav Shalom, just had his yard site. And well, anyways, let's jump into the Gemara with that introduction. Oh, the whole point was that we're using the Steinsaltz translation, which is a wonderful work. On occasion, we might find that Rabbi Steinsaltz doesn't always exclusively use Rashi, which I think is a testament to the greatness of the work. So on occasion, we might notice some variations in the translation. So just keep your eyes peeled. We're going to go back to the Mishnah, although we studied it long ago when we studied last. But let's get started. Let's jump right in. And by the way, this is one Mishnah on the subject. So it's not like we're going into a prolonged chapter, but we are going to be approximately a blot. So approximately two pages in the Gemara are going to be on the subject of Kilayim, and more specifically, Kilayim, again, we discussed is the crossbreeding of different items. In this context, we're talking about Kilayim of produce, which is the commingling, the intermingling of different products. And because we don't want to intermingle different products, there are halachic prescribed distance and space that is meant to be between different types of produce. And there are complicated halachos because the distance might vary depending on if there is a visual separation, if it is evident that they are apart. And so therefore there's a lot of feedback about how the layout of a field, or in our discussion, a garden patch might want to look. And that's what we're discussing. The layout of a garden patch in order to be halachic and rabbinically consistent, there needs to be some distance between different produce. And that's the Mishnah we're coming into. And just to remind you all, we're now going through a series of Mishnahs that are utilizing psukim to bring a proof to the central premise of the Mishnah. And it all started because we introduced the pasuk to talk about a vessel, the smallest size, if you recall from long ago. And let's just jump into the Mishnah again. Minay and Laruga, how do I know that a garden bed, which is Shehi Shishal, Shisha Tvachim, that is 6 handbreadths by 6 handbreadths wide, that it's plausible that you're allowed to plant within it 5 different types of zeronim, 5 different types of seeds. And Rashi right away points out, what do you mean? Technically, you could plant a lot of seeds, but we're talking about a halachic matter. This would not be considered a commingling of the different types of plants. One can figure out how to give the appropriate halachic distance between the different types. In the words of Rabbi Steinsaltz, he may do so without violating the prohibition of sowing a mixture of diverse seeds. And here's how it would go. Arba'a al arba ruchai saruga. 4 different types can be on the 4 different edges, the periphery of the garden patch or garden bed. The achas be'emtza, and you can also place one seed in the middle. So imagine a square that has on it 4 sides, and on each of the 4 sides there are a plant or plants, and then you have another plant smack in the middle. This is, the Mishnah doesn't really go into much explanation as to why this is the layout. That's what the Gemara is going to discuss. But the Mishnah just tells us you'll have 4 on 4 sides and 1 in the middle. And there's a verse that is that we use to give credence or to inform this teaching. Shenamar ki ka'aretz taitzi tzimcha uchigana zerueha tatzmiach. Like the land gives forth its sprouting produce, like a garden from which its vegetables, its growth grows forth. Zar'a loinemar elo zerueha. The word zerueha, the stuff that grows out, is plural. And so from there we can hang on. And from there we infer that there can be multiple types of produce in one garden. Beryl, should we do Rashi first or? Okay, go ahead.
I'm just wondering how we could have a universal principle when a lot depends on the soil and where you are. Are you in a windy country, a regular country? I'm just
because
wondering.
The principles here don't have to do with the yield. The principles here have to do with a halachically mandated distance between different plants.
Yeah, but the distance depends on the soil, and if you're living somewhere where it's very windy, you would need a bigger anyway.
Why are you saying that? Hold on. Explain. No, first you're not sidetracking me. Wait. Hold on one second. I'm still navigating these new headphones, and I don't know if you heard that music, but something started playing in the background. All right. How is wind, if the plant is sprouting, how is wind going to affect where it is?
When you're planting, there's some soil that's looser or tighter. I mean, Alan is the expert, but I know
So for best practices,
I don't know how you could have a fixed distance.
Wind
hold on.
affect by
pollination.
By cross pollination. Wind can affect kilayim.
Oh, okay. So I'm glad you're saying that. So the issue here, we're not talking about cross pollination. We're talking here about plants that are being seeded and they're garden. These are not trees. These are plants that are being planted in a garden. And ostensibly every year, everything is entirely removed from that garden patch when the plant grows. So here the issue is primarily the visual and evident distinction between different types of plants that are being planted. Now, in agriculture, you need a varying distance and space between each plant. That's not our discussion. Okay. This is a minimum proposed distance for the purposes of intermingled plants. If as the farmer, you know that you need to keep 3 feet between each plant, of course, you may do so. Here we're talking about the minimum distance between your cucumbers and your tomatoes and whatever. I should note, Beryl, although I swatted your comment, the Gemara does allude to your question as well. For the purpose of our discussion, it's not as relevant, but the Gemara ultimately does talk about what about plants that have bigger vines or other such things. So stay peeled. Okay. All right. Rashi, Dalid midalid ruchai aruga. So the Hebrew words, 4 on the 4 sides of the patch. It doesn't really tell us quite if it's a single plant on each corner or if it is a line. How much is it? And so Rashi tells us, Mimala es kol haruach ad samach lakern. You can plant almost on the periphery, the entire periphery of your garden patch. Ad samach lakern, almost to the corner. So that's not explicit in the Mishnah, but Rashi explains to us, and we're going to see here a picture that shows us what that looks like. Just to point out, other commentaries understand this differently, but we're going to try to stick to Rashi as our primary guide in this Gemara. So here, you see this picture? It's not super clear. Well, it's pretty clear. Basically, you see where it's gray? That's where you're planting. You're planting. So So this is a little patch, a garden patch. And so on each side, you could grow another type of plant. And then you have a single plant in the middle. And that could be of a different type. Just to remind us, it's 6 by 6. And so each square represents a square tefach to give us a visual of the square tefach. And if you think about it, the middle plant is roughly 3 tefachim of distance between the other plants. I say roughly because it's not precisely 3 tefachim, because each low row takes up a little bit of the tefach, and then the plant itself takes up some space, but approximately 3 or 2 and a fraction of a distance. Rashi va'achas be'emsa.
Like the ends are much closer together, though. They seem to be.
Correct. As we'll see. Garin echad v'afal pisha kol etzel hakronos smuchim zelazeh. Although the corners are ultimately closer, as Mark just pointed out, than 3 tefachim, ve'ein beinayim archak gimel tefachim, ve'yoinkim zemizeh, and they ultimately are sharing the space of the garden where they are drawing nourishment. Ein kan beis michush. We're not. I wonder if the word in the original is bei michush. That's probably what it should say. Ein kan. Okay, ein kan beis michush. We don't have to worry. The gabe kilayim hakerehu the beinon, because the primary issue with kilayim of vegetables here is hekera. It should be visually evident that they're not the same plant and they're not being grown together. The main issue is we don't want it to be one big intermingled mess of different plants. The verse's concern is of literal crossbreeding. Again, admittedly, my agriculture is very much farming is not my space, but I guess there are certain plants that there could be some kind of really growing together. But the fact that they are sharing the same space that they're growing nurture is not a biblical issue. Even kilayim, that's deraisa, we're still not really worried about them sharing where the nurture. We're worried about them growing together. As he brings the Gemara in Bavasra, certainly when we're talking about not trees, not plants, not kilei hakerem, but garden kilayim, it's rabbinic. Our primary concern is not that they might be getting nourishment and nurture from the same space. So ultimately, as we're going to see later, that the issue is primarily the visual separate distinction. It's very, very strongly evident that there are different types. Why? Ruach zu zrua safain vidarim vizu zrua mizrach memariv. As we're going to find out, farmers generally grow all the stuff they grow in a single field in a row, and the rows kind of work together if they're all vertical or horizontal. And so when 2 rows grow different ways, it's the most glaring evidence, if you're in the farm industry, that there's something that sets them apart, because otherwise you want to grow them in rows. And I imagine probably the reason why farmers grow things in rows is to maximize their ability to service them and so forth. And if anyone's visited a farm today, I believe you might find the same practices today, where more or less you try to grow it in a straight row and one row after another. So the fact that they're growing in 2 different directions, one is horizontal, one is vertical, they are around a box, it's very strongly evident that they are not being grown in an intermingled manner. And therefore, Mark, Rashi explains your question, although usually we say 3 tvachim is the amount that we need to create a strong, solid visual that the 2 items are apart. Here, because they are growing in different directions, we don't even need the 3 tvachim. That itself is the greatest evidence and makes it obvious that they're not being grown together. Dr. Hammer?
Can we deduce that it doesn't matter even if the vegetable is the same vegetable, like a pepper, but different colors, the seeds for green pepper, seeds for a yellow pepper or red pepper or whatever?
So you're asking a question in Kilei Zroim, in the laws of Kilayim of vegetables, what constitutes the same type of plant
Right.
and what is two different kinds of plants that can't be grown together. So I'm going to punt on that with the assumption that peppers, even though they're different colors, are considered of the same species. But admittedly, I have limited in-depth knowledge, so I'm going to hold off to what the Gemara is teaching us. Red Barrel, yes. Hold on, that was Dr. Ammer. Good question.
There was something about the Rambam that was saying that certain things were okay to be together because they were the same.
Correct. The Rambam writes there are certain things that look alike, but they're different, and other things that are different, but they look alike. And so you have to know.
Certain things that were okay to be
Correct.
together because they were.
Correct.
So that would probably green and red peppers are probably okay together.
Most likely they're okay. Most likely the same species. It's plausible that even different, there might be certain kinds of divergent species that are also really considered close enough. But there's a certain point where my knowledge weans offside or wears offside. Rather just keep it simple. Suffice it to say, the restrictions here are not for the same species; they're for different species. What exactly is the cutoff is actually marked. Probably the best reference would be the Rambam. So, Red Barrel. Yes.
Rabbi, when we talk about nourishment, how can we worry about watering the plants when the same thing happens when it rains?
We are not worried about watering plants. Where do we say watering plants? We're talking about nourishment.
I don't know, as part of the nourishment of so watering, there's no restrictions.
The issue here isn't water. The issue is if the roots basically are eventually going into the same little piece of land and drawing the other nutrients that are in the ground. So of course, water that's out of our control is out of our control. That's not to my knowledge the primary concern here. The main concern is that if they are, because plants, in addition to water, they need to have soil that needs to have certain nutrients. And so if the nutrients come from the same place, where essentially there is some type of commingled dynamic. Dr. Stalin.
So when it comes to the nutrients,
Yes.
certain plants, certain vegetables need different nutrients than others. And if you put too much, if one needs a certain amount, but that would be too much nutrient for the other plant, for the other type, it could become a problem because they did say that we're not worried about the nutrients. But maybe
Stay tuned. Stay tuned. The Gemara is going to explicitly and very beautifully make that point. As you'll see, we're going to get there in a moment.
I sort of see a similarity. I mean, it's not exact because it's not a live object, but when you have lo tachorosho v'chamor,
exactly,
the reason is because they have different strengths.
Yes.
So I can see an analogy between the two.
Yeah, very good. Yes. There are also mystical reasons behind the desire to set apart different kinds. But certainly when it comes to the animals, quite literally, it would be hard and damaging and painful for an animal to have to, of one gait, to try to get along with an animal that has a different type of gait. And that is one of the explanations given, the primary explanation given about lo tachrosh.
The other problem that I have, which is fundamental, is why the Gemara, all of a sudden, I mean, we have an almanac for the farmer here. I mean,
just wait. We haven't even gotten
it yet. We haven't even scratched the surface. It's
this is not
when you have, I mean, every single thing we do in life is brought down to minutia, and I don't know how anybody knows everything about how to conduct themselves when, I mean, this is a farmer. I mean, I sometimes take a plant and over here and over there, and inadvertently I could make a mistake. But I mean, it's mind-boggling that they go down to that kind of minutia. And it's a religious, to me, this is a religious book, and to go to cover everything, I just don't understand it.
Yes, Judaism is a religion unlike many others.
Like
there is no other religion that really has an opinion about every aspect of Jewish life. And the Jewish philosophical reason behind that is because Judaism believes that every aspect of life is holy, and there's an opportunity for a Jew to stay connected to Hashem in every aspect of of living. But now, ultimately, one could imagine, and I'm sure Dr. Hammer's seen, and I know some people who struggle from different kinds of, let's say, obsessive tendencies, and such a person can struggle with Judaism because it's very detailed. But on the flip side, for an average person, if one makes sure to be educated, you don't have to be agonizing in every moment. You live life, and eventually you can be trained to live a halachic life without having to constantly, be paralyzed by to navigate every part of life. And however, being said, a person who becomes a Baal Teshuvah, a person that wasn't brought up, I'm sorry, I should say this. So if a person is brought up in a Jewish lifestyle, it's quite easy. I don't want to overstate it, but it could be very intuitive that the person, as they grow up and come of age and become aware of the world around them and the way life is lived, they become educated step by step about how to do it in a Jewish way. So if a kid's father is a farmer and he goes out to the field to help his father, he will slowly become aware without him being overwhelmed of all the different aspects of agriculture. So a kid, let's say from the age of 3 to 10, they'll experience all of the cycles of farming and the contributions and the fact that you leave a corner. And so it becomes very instinctive, just like, however, a person that does the most wonderful decision and chooses to embrace Yiddishkeit late in life certainly can be overwhelmed. And for that reason, many people who are rabbis who guide people going through such an experience will explicitly encourage them to have a gradual and incremental experience of growth so as not to be overwhelmed and so as not to be,
Rabbi,
yes.
in today's world, all these things that we're studying, whether they're minutia or not, is there a concern? Do we check carefully in a supermarket vegetables, fruit? Do we need a mashgiach to sit in the vegetable section?
So you're asking another question. You're asking, you asked this question last time we did the Mishnah twice in a different way. Do we need to be mindful if a Gentile grows kilaim, or is it only for a Jew, right? So that answer would remain the same. If it's acceptable for a Gentile, or if a Gentile is not restricted by these rules, so then you might not be restricted about when you go to the store to buy I don't know, whatever, engineered stuff or whatever stuff that's grown together. So you might not need a mashgiach in your vegetable plant. However, in Eretz Yisrael, because of matters of Shvius, of Shemitah, and other Truma and Ma'aser, you do need a mashgiach. And many American yeshiva students, one of the biggest problems they have is that they think that they know everything because they know everything. You come to Eretz Yisrael and you discover the things that are most difficult to be problematic are most easy to be a question in Eretz Yisrael. And then you learn, and then and you do it. And I don't want to go now because Shemitah is very much not what we're discussing. But let's say, for example, in Shemitah, there are different poskim that have different ways of dealing with Shemitah, and it's a great question about literally not working the land. There are those that have some kind of arrangement where the land is sold to a Gentile who does not adhere to the laws of Shemitah. I don't want to go there now. Suffice it to say, there are indeed many questions. But if you grow up in an environment, you pick up all the rules. I would say the same. You read a book about a person living in Victorian England and all the different etiquette rules, and it might have also been overwhelming. But I have a feeling that, and today we also have societal expectations of what you do when you walk into a place and shaking hands and how to do it. And it's very minute. We could technically give a rule book, and actually, I think diplomats, when they come to different countries, they have a rule book, a shulchan aruch of how to shake hands and how to make eye contact and what to say and what to do. And it probably is very overwhelming. But that's any lifestyle, any way of living.
It's a real problem. We just had the problem with the lettuce, which I don't have to tell
Why is
anybody.
Why use the word problem? It's a matter, not a problem. It is something that we need to be.
But just picking up lettuce automatically and going home happy.
Yeah. So we're lucky. We're lucky that our life, every part of life, is meaningful, and it's with determination. And a Jew doesn't just get to live life. A Jew gets to live every moment in connection to Hashem. And what's the word today? With mindfulness, we get to live a mindful life, and that's, by the way, a big keyword today.
Jacobson term, yeah.
No, because today everyone talks about meditation and mindfulness and not living life, haphazardly, but being in the moment. And when you're focusing on the rules of life or doing it right, and So you have an opportunity to be mindful. That's not a guarantee. I'm not saying that every person that tries to keep halacha is mentally healthy, because it's a universe and there's a lot of stuff happening. So, people struggle in all different ways. But we
Dr.
can
Hammer,
also
Dr.
embrace the gift.
That's
Right,
why
we have
Rav
to, Bernie,
Bach-
we have to hope there's no sharpness with elevators. They
Don't
use
ask-
these parts.
Don't ask us. You don't want to know. Talk to me later about the elevators. But Rabbi,
I heard.
you heard it back up, but they were down again today for an
Yeah,
hour.
I heard this morning somebody has a medical appointment.
All right, let's
Yeah,
bring it back.
Getting back to no. I just want to reinforce what you said about the kid whose father's a farmer. He learns that. To me, it's always sort of interesting where people grew up, because from a religious point of view, there are issues that are not issues, and there are other people that are issues. So if you grow up in Menachem and I are both from Teaneck. If you grow up in a Teaneck area, as a kid, an Erev is not an issue. You didn't even know you need, from a little kid growing up. I mean, you don't get, maybe there's a thing Erev up, but it's always up, If there's a hurricane, maybe, so then there's something like that, as compared to growing up in other communities where it's a big issue. And from the time you're very young, maybe you couldn't go to shul because there was an Erev. And then maybe, I'm just using that as an example of certain things taken for granted, which then impacts Baal Tshuva, who had no issues, before, and the importance of one thing versus another, or the remedy is sort of overpowering, because you want to do the right thing. It's so important.
Right.
So
And that's why rabbis, I'm not going to say all rabbis, but that's why many rabbis are proactive in guiding a person that wants to come close to Yiddishkeit to be gradual and to take it step by step, because when a person that tries to do everything will end up very shortly doing nothing and having a negative association. So
as a counter to all the physical minutia that we have to follow, do this, do that, Rav Bachya Gaon wrote Chovat Alvavot to bring in the emotional aspect of serving God.
Yes, we can't forget it, or as Dr. Hammer would say, the kavana, the spirit. We can't forget about the spirit in all those actions. But when coupled together, you need to have a healthy body and a healthy soul.
Right.
There needs to be healthy practice, but also healthy mindfulness, healthy kavana, and to get things right and healthy and in a well-adjusted way is a lifetime. So, all right, let's just go back to Rashi for a moment. Rashi was explaining to us very nicely the primary issues here. And again, the issue here is more that we should plant our gardens, or the halacha creates halachic guidelines for farming appropriately without causing a commingling of plants. And so I want to add over here, this is not like you have to, this Mishnah is not telling you, Mr. Farm, telling you, Alan, we're going to pick on you because you're the closest we have to someone that knows a little bit about farming. The Torah is not saying, Alan, you want to grow a Jewish garden, you have to plant in a square like that. That's not what we're saying. We're saying, should you want to plant a little garden patch and you want to plant different types of stuff, how could you squeeze in the most amount of vegetables, different kind of vegetables, in a small little square, 6 tvachim by 6 tvachim? We're talking about a pretty small little space. Mark will do the math for us. What is it, 1.5 feet approximately by 1.5 feet? We're not talking about a very large, maybe a little bigger than that, but not much bigger than that. 2 feet.
About 18 inches. It's not 3 inches. 3 tvachim is about 9 inches. 9 1/4.
Okay.
9.5.
So we're talking about approximately 1.5 by 1.5. Talking about a pretty small space. And so again, not that you have to do it. That's the best. This is a way to do this. So, anyways,
What happens, Rabbi? What
Yes.
happens when a pig farmer
okay.
uses pig manure to grow vegetables?
So you're asking, is pig manure not kosher?
That's right.
Do you eat pig manure? I mean you. Does one eat?
Alan, not to the best of your knowledge, Alan.
Okay, I'm gonna start washing my vegetables. One should wash their vegetables very well. And by the way, pig manure is a halbatzara, but the pesticides, that's a bigger concern. Anyways, so I think we can close that right here. I just want to, because he gives us a lot of the building blocks here. So let's continue reading it, even though there's a lot of minutia. Yeshkan heker gadol. So when you grow them on lines and they're vertical and horizontal, it's quite evident that they are apart. But the plant that's in the middle of the room, the plant that's in the middle of the box, that one is really the one that has the main issue. We need to allow a distance. Kidei yinika, which how much of a distance? The average amount of space that we say a plant draws its nutrition, nourishment, whatever. The ein sham haken. The have a mekarvi have a irov. It would be too close. If it would be any closer to the side plants, that would have the appearance, and it would be classified halachically as a commingling of plants. If you say that we're only talking about one pintala, one seed on each corner, that's a mistake. So anyways, Rashi negates other interpretations of the Mishnah. Zero. Rashi tells us, take a look at the Gemara and you'll know what you need to know. So that's the Mishnah. In a sense, we learned it already. The Mishnah is telling us how one might be able to squeeze in 5 different types of plants in a very small little 1.5 foot approximately garden patch. Not you should, that's what you could do. My mashma, the Gemara says, help us out over here. How does the Mishnah figure this out? Rav Yehuda says, simple. In the Gemara's format of biblical exegesis, drasha, we have here a reference to the number 5, which is a clue that you could fit 5 different plants into a little garden patch. What's 5? Rav Yehuda. The verse says, Cha'aretz toisi simcha, as the earth gives forth its growth. Toitzi gives forth is 1. Simcha, chad, hare trei. So we have 2. Zeiru eha, a word that is in the plural, teaches us 2. Trei, ha'arba, tatzmiya, chad, ha'chamisha. So this is an interesting drasha where we have 5 different words, and ultimately we read in from here that you might have 5 different plants in a single patch. Rashi. So Rashi explains that ultimately this is not what the pasuk is teaching us, obviously. We are reading this pasuk and allowing it to teach us this. So for example, Rashi says, V'shisha tvachim, the mikra. The pasuk doesn't tell us the dimensions of the garden patch. So how do we know that it's 6 tvachim? Kim lahu l'rabbanan. The rabbis know it is an established fact. This tamaruga nizrasba hezaronim kachim idasim. Generally, a garden patch that's going to have 5 seeds would have the dimensions of 6 by 6. Why? Because 5 plants across 6 tvachim won't share the same little earth that they're nourishing from. Each plant really only needs a tefach and a half of space, including where the seed is. So basically, you could end up having 3 tvachim, 1.5 on each side, on each plant. From here we can infer that the Mishnah generally believes that every plant needs its own little space of a tefach and a half, and it excludes the actual plant itself. It's like an alafilu in bal zuri connecting them. Zuri alma warchak is like. Anyways, basically, ultimately, we're going to use this formula. The formula that says a tefach and a half distance is enough distance to say that they're not fighting over the same little patch of soil. And
I have a
so
question.
the
I have
Mishnah
a
says 6. I'm sorry, the Mishnah says 5, and the smallest space that you might plausibly have 5 plants is 6 tefachim squared. Yes, Rebbe Nachum.
So in practical terms, today people who have homes, have lawns, have gardens, have gardeners, how do we have to follow? I mean, what kind of instructions? Do we have to give gardeners instructions as far as distances between
For
plants?
vegetables or for planting
No, for
petunias?
plants in
And
general, or, I mean, does that also apply to general plants?
so you know what, let me do this. I don't want to be pulling from memory. Maybe we'll try to find, Bli Neder, a little basic primer with a few bulletins that we could share. So we'll walk away with any practical questions, but I'd rather bring it to you in an organized way from a source than just pulling it out of my head. As I've told you, I've never engaged yet in farming. And so it was never a matter of a practical halacha for me. Maybe I will have a second career as a farmer. You never know. So, but let me see if I can get you something that we can get at least the basic answers.
Right. It's a very good idea. And once you're doing that, many people today have a few chickens and their own eggs. It would be worthwhile having a look how they paskin. What do we say?
Very good. Okay, so we'll have a good follow up. No, but Bli Neder, unlike Dr. Hammer's 472 items, this is something Bli Neder I'll find you something that we can take to the bank.
Is there a
Good-
minimum,
good-
is there a minimum number of chickens you have to have in order to
To make chicken soup?
no, to just be, that you have to follow certain directions?
No.
You-
You're asking a very good question. There are certain minimums of different things before to be considered, to need to be considered. While we're talking, hold on. While we're talking, we're going to do a few more lines in the Gemara, but I just want to tell Dr. Stamler that I met Rabbi Taylor, the author of the Sefer that I mentioned, the Jewish Guide to the Mysterious, and I spoke to him. And Bli Neder will. There's a lot of events happening this week. We had a nice women's event, and we're starting the Jewish Learning Institute. So this week, I need a few minutes, but Bli Neder, we're going to schedule. We have a few guest presenters in the near future. And Bli Neder, I spoke to Rabbi Taylor in person, and Mirza Hashem will have him give a little presentation.
I would even suggest if, because it could be interesting for you to contact some other Chabad in the neighborhood, and instead of just presenting it as from Chabad, from the Ocean Chabad, from a few Chabad.
Maybe we'll partner. Maybe we'll make a little event. We'll see. Either we'll do it on Zoom or we'll do it in person. So Mirza
Well,
Hashem.
I think it would be better to that.
No,
Zoom should definitely be involved.
Of course, it's gonna be Zoom. We have a very important VIP anyways, and not everyone wants to schlep out right now. So Mirza Hashem we'll have it done. All right, let's get a few more lines in before we call it a day. The Kimlu Rabbanan, the pasuk teaches us about the plants, the 5 plants. The Kimlu Rabbanan, the Chazal say, as Rashi just elaborated, the Chamisha B'Shisa L'Yanke Madadi. If you have 5 seeds in a 6 tefachim dynamic, they will not end up nurturing from one another. And so, being that in a 6 tefachim squared dynamic, you could have 2 seeds with 3 tefachim between them. It is on this basis that we have our Gemara. Let's go back to the picture. I want to show you that picture if we can find it. Here, look. So if you would have a plant here and a plant here, we'll have 3 tefachim across. You'll put a plant here, 3 tefachim, here, 3 tefachim. Oh, anyways, all right. Well, we'll get back to it later. Uminalon. How do we know? From where do I know, in truth, that this 5 plants, 6 tefachim? How do we know this rabbinic thing is ois gehalten? How do we know it's legit? Excuse me. Rashi, Bashir Yanika Milsi. Because what's happening really is the Chachamim are saying that as far as Yanika nourishment is concerned, every plant needs it's tefach and a half distance or 3 tefachim around. How do we know this is a legitimate assertion? Rashi, Bashir Yanika Milsi, Lemes Mechala. Someone asked, is there an almanac? How do the Chachamim know indeed this is the situation? Where is this from? How do we know? So here we're going to see that there's some kind of long-standing Israeli almanac. The verse says, there's a famous pasuk that says, don't move your neighbor's boundaries. Asher Gavlu Rishonim that were long set up by the original folks. So we commonly know that it's talking about moving a boundary. But there's an additional limud here. My Gavlu Rishonim. Who are these Rishonim? Who are these originators of boundaries? Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani, Rabbi Yochanan taught here. I'll tell you who those Rishonim are. We have a verse that says these are the descendants of Seir HaChayri that live in the land. What does it mean when you say about a specific tribe they live in the land? Does that mean that everybody else is living in space? See, if I wanted to tease today's Gemara, I would have said a reference to Martians. Today's Gemara is a reference to Martians, but it's a negative reference to Martians. Do you think everyone else is living in space? No, everybody that we know of lives on Earth. What does it mean? Yoshvei haaretz, shahayu b'kiyim b'yeshuva shel haaretz. They were experts at getting the land set up, at growing and planting. They were expert farmers. Shahayu oimrim. They would be able to say, they would go to a field, they look at the earth and they say, this area, this is where you need to have, this is the perfect soil for olives. This is the perfect soil for grapevines. So Dr. Stalmer, you mentioned that certain earth is ideal for certain kinds of plants. So indeed, there were, not only today, but once upon a time, experts who were able to eyeball a piece of land and know exactly what the ideal crop would be. Like Kanazelatanin, this should be figs. Hold on. Hachayri, who are the Chayri? Shemarichim es. They're able to sniff the earth. The Hachivi. They were such expert farmers. They were able to taste a little bit of the earth, and they would know what kind of vegetation belongs there, just like a chivya, like a snake. They were unsuccessful, ultimately in maintaining their land, and they were emptied out. So each of the nations had a word that was code for something else. But what's interesting for us is the people that were experts in agriculture. So how do we know? Well, because we have a long-standing tradition in Israel from the experts agriculture. We have an almanac, but it wasn't maybe a written almanac. There was a oral tradition. There was a tradition of best practices for planting in Israel, and included in this is the rule about how every plant ideally gets its own little space to grow and extract energy, nutrients from the soil. Rashi, let's go back to Rashi. Vilreacha, your boundaries. Lita samach lemetzar. So when it says loisasik vilreacha, it not only means that you shouldn't move the border markers. It also means that you should be mindful about planting something on the periphery of your property that will impact your neighbor. Lita samach lemetzar lahachish karkoi. You should be thoughtful before planting something on the border that's going to ultimately ruin your neighbor's land. Kishir asher gavlu rishonim. What is the measure? Follow the old standing rishonim tradition. Who are these originators? Who are the original people? Who were the indigenous folks? These were the Amorim, the Chivim that were experts at the agricultural standards of the land of Israel. So when you come to the land and you find out how much space you need to put before two lands, use those rules and be kind, mindful, and respectful to your neighbor's interests in his property next door to you. So literally, kana means the measuring stick. They would measure an area and say, this space is for this plant. So Rabbi Steinsaltz, in the book that the Koran publisher gave me, hold on, I have to pull it up, but he says basically, how could you taste the earth and know which plants? So he says, today we know that different lands have different pH levels, and different plants, I don't know if I'm going to find it inside, but you'll have to take my word for it. Different plants right. Yeah. Different plants have different types of soil, different types of quality, density, etc. And so that's what we're talking about over here. Shemarichim. Excuse me. So there you have it. This is the basic premise that says that 5 plants in 6 tfachim. My dear friends, there you have it. We're just getting started. It's the discussion about best agricultural best practices for agriculture and to avoid the commingling. Bli neder, tomorrow we'll probably finish this unit and move on to the next Mishnah. I'd like to thank you all for joining us as we are back. And we should mention in closing a prayer for good health, well-being for everyone. For all of Klal Yisrael, we'll mention in particular Nisim Chaim ben Mazel, Chaim Baruch Eliezer ben Rusa Esther, and Leah Basrita. They should have miraculous, complete, speedy recovery with Soich, Shar, Choyle Yisrael, all those that are in need. And for those on this group, they should be blessed with health, wellness, prosperity, nachas, and all good things, and a lot of koyach to continue learning the Gemara with simcha, alacrity, and the insight and intelligence. I want to thank you all for being here. Look forward to doing this again tomorrow. Be'ezer Hashem. Oh, I should point out for those that are interested, we are starting our next Jewish Learning Institute's course, Outsmarting Anti-Semitism. It's not just going to be another course on anti-Semitism, but it's going to go through a lot of the Torah and Jewish perspectives, in addition to what activists understand to be helpful. It's starting tomorrow night, and it's going to be 4 Wednesdays at 7 p.m. It's not too late to sign up. We're going to have a Zoom and in-person option, but I'd like to encourage Zoom attendance for those that are interested. And you're more than welcome to reach out to me, and I'll be happy to add you to the course. Or you can go online if you want to do that, chabadashandrive.com/JLI. So that is that. It's also Yeshiva night tonight for those that are interested in knowing what's happening. Anyways, a big ashkach, Dr. Hammer.
Just a quip for Rab Beryl's question, which has to do with Kavana. I doubt when people say holy manure, they have pigs in mind.
Also, in case we're worried about all these rules, we should remember that most Jews are on a diet to lose weight, not to worry too much.
Yeah. All right. Take care. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day. Hope to see you all tomorrow.
Sequoia, good to be back, Rabbi. Missed you.
Doctor, good to see you. Doctor, good to see you. Doctor, good to see you. Alan, Mark, Beryl.
I'll see you in person tonight at Yeshiva night.
Shkai, wonderful. All right, Shkai, take care.
Is Shalom Bear having a class?
Shalom Ber Chumash. All right, Chumash is back on track as well. Thank you. Yeah, Chumash will be right now, so you can rejoin in the link. I'm going to end it, and then you rejoin it.
It's